Joining us now for more is Cale Salih in Oxford. She's a visiting fellow to the European Council on Foreign Relations, focusing on the Kurdish people. In the studio, Daniel Serwer is a professor in conflict management at Johns Hopkins University. From Ankara, Tulin Daloglu. She is a Turkish journalist and opinion writer, and Joshua Walker is also in our studio. He is a transatlantic fellow at the German Marshall Fund, a nonpartisan U.S. think tank. Looking forward to chatting with all of you. Cale, why don't I start with you? Why don't you tell us basically what is the PKK? Is it a terrorist organization? And then if you can, and briefly, try and get into the weeds and explain who all the players are when it comes to the Kurds involved in the conflict.
Well, the PKK is an organization, a Turkish Kurdish organization that has been fighting with the Turkish state for many decades, and it is considered a terrorist organization by the European Union and the United States. However, since the Syrian civil war, the PKK has really emerged as a transnational movement. So it also now exists in Syria and in Iraq. And the U.S. has drawn a distinction between the PKK, the core of the organization, the Turkish Kurdish organization, which it does consider to be a terrorist group, and the PYD in Syria. But Turkey does not draw the same distinction. So this is where you start to get into sort of the alphabet soup of the Kurdish factions, and there are many. You have the PKK and its regional affiliates, which go by different names, and you also have the Iraqi Kurds, which make up the Kurdistan regional government in northern Iraq and have a number of factions amongst themselves that also have their own rivalries and divisions.
Tulin, let me ask you about this. You know, it seems for the longest time this aphorism, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and ISIL's been kind of going at it against the PKK. How did Turkey shift their viewpoint and get involved in this, although they are obviously targeting the PKK as well as ISIL?
True. I'm not sure whether Turkey has shifted its position, but it is definitely signaling that it's getting closer to the position of mainly the U.S. and the Western allies in the fight against IS, that's the Islamic State of the Iraq and the Levant. Now, what Turkey is doing is that they have come to an agreement with the U.S. And with that agreement, now, as the U.S. is going to attack the IS targets, mainly in Syria, but possibly in Iraq as well, Turkey does not want these areas to be controlled. Once the IS leaves that area, Turkey does not want these areas to be controlled by the PKK and its affiliates. So therefore, it is targeting the PKK. It's targeting the PKK militia in northern Iraq for now.
Daniel, it's complicated, but it seems to me there are two competing narratives. There's the U.S. point of view on how this is all stacking up, and then Turkey's viewpoint. Why was it that Turkey would not allow the U.S. to use this base, and how significant is it that the U.S. can now use it?
I think it is very significant from the American perspective because it allows American planes to be over their targets in Iraq and Syria for much longer periods of time. There's much less transit time involved for the U.S. warplanes. So it's very significant in that sense. The Turks venture a guess that the reason they hadn't allowed American use of these planes is that they weren't in agreement with the American objective, which was to fight ISIL and not Bashar al-Assad. And they were trying to convince the Americans that they had to fight Bashar al-Assad first and ISIL second. I don't think that issue remains outstanding between the Americans and the Turks, but they seem to have agreed to do something in an area of northern Syria that is ill-defined, and even the something is ill-defined. The Turks say it's to create a protected zone. The Americans say it's just to clear ISIL from that area. Those can be quite different objectives and raise a lot of question marks.
Joshua, you and I chatted about this earlier this week, but it's interesting. I posed this question to Natalie, who's on the ground in Istanbul, that basically the Turkish government has looked at three-pronged issues: Assad, but the PKK would probably come first, then Assad, and then ISIL, which I think Daniel was just pointing out. There really hasn't been a shift in this point of view, has there? I mean, are these two countries on the same page?
When you talk about Turkey and the U.S., I think you need to start out by saying Turkey doesn't have a government right now. You have President Erdogan, who's the only leader that's democratically elected right now. The calculations on the ground are being driven by domestic politics. I agree with your assessment about the three different kind of factors there in terms of Assad, PKK, and ISIL. And clearly, the change, I think Tulin already referenced this. She said, I don't see a change here. There's a difference of emphasis. And I think Turkey has gotten off the sideline. I agree with Daniel. This is significant in terms of letting American, fighters use Incirlik. But at the same time, it actually complicates things even further. And the idea of kind of how does Turkey see the conflict here? It's very different than the U.S. If you look at most of the strikes, they're happening in northern Iraq, not in Syria. So the question is, how do you keep Kurdish unity in Syria, where the Kurdish brutes on the ground, whether they're called a terrorist organization with the PYD and PKK, or they're simply kind of fighting for their ground against ISIL? This is where we have a bit of a difference between Washington and Ankara, where they're currently trying to work that out.
Tulin, I saw you smile when Joshua was talking about the government, the kind of the domestic element of all of this. How is this being viewed in Turkey?
Well, it's really very complicated, and Joshua is definitely right on target. Turks went to the polls on June 7th, and the Turkish public decided that it will be best for them to have a coalition government. Since then, there is no government in Turkey, and all these military operations are being conducted basically with an acting government, and the legality of it is, open to question. It's all about interpretations, how you use that. But whether it's important or not, I do not know. But there was a special session of the parliament yesterday where the opposition Republican People's Party, CHP, asked the parliament to convene in the session and basically asking about, conducting or, launching a parliamentary inquiry commission to look into this suicide attack that killed about 32 people in Suruç, Urfa. That's very close to the Syrian border. And the AKP and the opposition Nationalist Movement Party decided to turn the sword, and they just prevented this commission to be formed in the parliament. So this is really very tricky because we do not know many of the things that we are discussing right now. Everything is being done in the dark. There is no transparency, and so it's really a very murky situation right now here.
Murky, done in the dark. It's interesting. When I think of scriptwriters, I think of the folks in Hollywood and then the folks here in Washington, D.C. They like to write these scripts. I mean, if you look at Iraq, the script went this way: topple the dictator, the people rejoice, they celebrate, there's nothing but gratitude, democracy spreads throughout Iraq, and all of a sudden the U.S. has this great ally, and it kind of reshapes the Middle East. Clearly that didn't happen. It seems like there's a script being sold here in Washington about this as well. So Daniel, I'll start with you. What's the message Washington's sending, but what's likely to happen? Because we saw in Iraq, you can have the best blueprint in the world, it doesn't necessarily go that way.
I don't even think they have a very good blueprint at the moment. Washington's message is, we're fighting ISIL. We want to clear ISIL from a piece of northern Syria, because that piece of northern Syria is important and strategic. But they have no plans, so far as I know, so far as they've said, for who's going to govern in that area after ISIL is cleared. And we know all too well that when you clear terrorists or insurgents from an area and don't provide governance and law and order afterwards, they'll be back. Yeah. So I'm puzzled, to tell you the truth. The president clearly doesn't want to get more deeply involved than he absolutely has to, but it seems to me he does have to.
Colin, let me ask you the same question. What's the script here, and what's the script likely to look like when all is said and done?
Well, there's a growing fear amongst many Kurds that Turkey is aiming to carve out this so-called anti-ISIS free zone, or whatever name you call it, in order to target the PYD, sort of as a cover to target the PYD. So I think that this zone, which, I mean, ill-defined is really the operative word here, we don't know how this zone is going to be created, we don't know who is going to create it, and we don't know really what it's going to be for. And the risk is that this kind of zone could be a place where Turkey clashes with the PYD, or where it becomes a place case where Turkey has the objective of fighting the Assad regime and the U.S. has the objective of fighting ISIS, and that those objectives would clash. So it's very unclear, but certainly I agree with Daniel that it's really in these areas where there's no governance that groups like ISIS thrive. So if there's no plan for after clearing ISIS from these areas, then I think we're going to have a lot of trouble.
Tulin, we're just about ready to go to the break, but I want to give you a stab at that one too. What's the script look like there in Turkey, and what's likely to happen?
What's likely to happen, we do not know, but the Turkish side is saying that, yes, once they, clear the area from ISIL, then they also do not want the PKK or the PKK affiliates to fill in this space. So for that, I think the U.S. gave in, and they are allowing Turkey to bomb the PKK targets in northern Iraq, just as I said in the first round. But, what's interesting is that we are coming to August 2nd, the first Gulf War anniversary, basically, August 2nd, 1991, Iraq invaded Kuwait, and then, it all started the same thing. Now, the 480th Fighter Squadron that's based out of Germany, the U.S. Air Force, is now moving to Turkey. It's been announced about, an hour or 2 hours ago. They will come back again to Incirlik Air Base, and they are going to start operating out of Incirlik to target these IS or ISIL, targets in Syria, but possibly in Iraq as well. So we will see how this cooperation is going to evolve. I am not sure whether Turkey and the U.S. is really looking eye to eye when it comes to what they're going to do once they clear the area from ISIL, and how they are going to, keep this area clean, from Jabhat al-Nusra or Ahrar al-Sham and other radical groups, and who is going to replace it. It's all very unknown. So there are a lot of, things that we can speculate, but time is going to show how this is going to evolve.
We have to pause, but more on the latest battle in the war against ISIL coming up. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.